In this lesson, we'll be talking about CSS columns. This is one of the new properties that I'm especially excited about, mainly because there was no way to do this before without using some very complicated JavaScript. What we can now do is take this block of text here and separate it out into multiple columns. And before we get started, let's take a look and see what the browser support is. CSS multiple column layout, it looks like, is supported for the most part by everybody aside from IE9 and below. Do keep in mind that you need all of these browser prefixes to make it work in all these different browsers. Using it is actually very easy. Because I'm working on a WebKit browser, I'm going to be typing WebKit column, WebKit this, WebKit that until the end. That way we can see what we're doing with a minimal amount of typing. If you want to follow along, open up columns.html in your working files folder. I'm typing WebKit column count 2. And just like that, I have some text which is now laid out in 2 columns. I can resize the window and everything still works just as it should. Now I can also do WebKit column width. I'm setting it to be 10em. As we discussed in the measurement section, ems are a measurement based on the font size. Now you'll notice when I get small enough, it switches from 2 columns to 1 column. By putting both of these rules in here, I've basically said, do a maximum column count of 2, and prefer that, please. But if the width ever gets smaller than 10em, you're going to have to decrease this number. So I can say this can go up to 3. If I refresh, you'll notice it's still at 2. If I make it big enough that the columns can be 10ems wide, it does switch to 3. And you'll notice if I make it much bigger, it never goes beyond 3 because my maximum column count is going to be 3. A better way of thinking of it instead of maximum column count is more desired column count. I'm telling the computer I want a column count of 3 ideally, but no smaller than 10ems. I can do the same exact thing with a shorthand property. This property here does the same thing as the 2 lines above it. Now I can go a bit further than this. I can say height 400 pixels. And now if I make this smaller, you'll notice that the container wants to be 400 pixels tall. The container is this div here called content. In this way, it'll use my 3 columns with a width, so that way you can get kind of a newspaper thing, but it doesn't necessarily go all the way to the bottom. In other words, we're changing whether or not it gets to the bottom instead of changing the height so it always gets to the bottom. There are a couple of other fantastic properties that we have now too. One of them is WebKit column gap. If I refresh, you'll notice that the gap between columns is quite a bit larger. I also have WebKit column rule. The value here is going to be the same syntax as if we were setting a border. Now we have a nice line in between them. So that just about does it. Now keep in mind that if you want to use this on all the browsers, you're going to have to do each of these lines multiple times. Now this code looks really messy, but unfortunately that's one of the things that we have to contend with, since that's what allows us to use it before the specification is completed. That's the reason that all of these browsers before all support it. If we didn't have vendor prefixes, we wouldn't have any of this support in all these older browsers, because they would have had to wait until it was finalized. So those are the basics of CSS3 columns.